So welcome everybody to our evening this evening about UNDRIP. Rachel Snow is of the Stoney Nakota Nation, which is in the lands otherwise known commonly as Alberta. And without further ado, Rachel, how's your Wi-Fi? I think it's snowing where you are, right?
It is, but I'm still on. Can you hear me?
You sound great.
Okay, that's
Welcome,
good.
Rachel.
Well, I just, sorry, I just decided to unmute because it looked like business had stopped. So I was in the middle of hearing your adulations to me. I didn't quite catch them all. I'm sure it's been recorded, so I can go back and look at it.
Indeed, it is being recorded.
And then I just broke my pen as I was sitting here. And I'm always forever losing pens. So I had to go scramble for a new, but I've got one. So I'm going to be, before I begin, I was just going to ask if generally there were any specific questions or anything, any topics or anything anybody really felt that they wanted to, where they wanted the conversation to be directed or to have some information on, because I prefer to have it more interactive. I prefer to have people ask me questions or pause or send Karen a message and maybe, you know, just wave at me or something, so that if there's some tangent or something that you want to have happen, we can certainly do that, because I feel that the only way to communicate or to educate or to assist, especially with First Nation, the differences in First Nation methodologies, understandings, the way that we give our information. The only way to do that is if we have kind of a reciprocal communication. So before we begin, I usually like to know who I'm speaking to. So like I like people to say their names and where they're from and kind of their background, because that helps me communicate my message, if that can be done.
Absolutely. Yeah, some people might type it into the chat and some people might want to say it out loud. I think
Great.
people can unmute and
I'm going to look at the chat at the same time.
Not
that chatty.
May I?
Yes, Gord.
Hi, Rachel. My name's Gord, and I'm the chair of the Vancouver DPAC. Thank you very much for coming. I am really interested in hearing what you have to say. I mean, you know, my knowledge of many things, including UNDRIP, is evolving, and you know, I've seen all the things in UNDRIP that want to be implemented, and I really am looking forward to hearing a perspective that kind of challenges that. The way I mentioned it in my introduction earlier today was, I think there are pitfalls there, and I'm looking forward to hearing, you know, just cautions or dissenting words about what is being focused on, and are those the right things, or you know, what traps might we fall into. So I really am looking to learn and just hear about how we can make sure that the document, this document doesn't get used in the wrong way. So I thank you.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have a burning need to give me some direction? Go ahead.
Hi, oh, sorry, go ahead. You can go. And Adrian, you go ahead.
You go first, Sky.
Okay, anyhow, I'm Sky, I'm on the DPAC executive. I have a student still in grade 10. So I was born in Vancouver. So I do live on the lands of Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish nations. But my ancestors come from a lot of different places. So from Mexico and primarily Scottish, those two, but also some other, a mix of about 8 different nations. So anyhow, what I was wondering about, because I was doing a little bit of reading about it, and I was I think this UNDRIP has been around for a few decades in terms of when it got initiated, and I think there was a lot of countries that had voted, but I what I read was there was like Canada, the US, New Zealand, and I think
Australia.
Australia didn't. Yeah, so I was just wondering if you could maybe elaborate a bit more on what happened there and what you think is the problem and why people are so, why there was that resistance from the government to government.
Okay, thank you. And
Adrian. Hi, my name's Adrian. It's really great to meet you, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I guess my question, first of all, I'm a white settler, and I'm here to try and help as best I can. And I often have trouble with stuff like UNDRIP or other like reconciliation things, because I tend to immediately go with the like decolonize aspect, but I'm white, so I want to learn more how to balance colonial or governmental, whatever that means, efforts, and support that if that's appropriate, but also while supporting land back and decolonization, etc., because that's where my heart tends to lie. But being a settler, I can't decide. Like, I don't want to cover anyone's voice, and I know Indigenous people aren't one person, they're many nations, so it's complicated. So I'm interested in guidance in that area. Thank you.
And Rachel, I'm just going to interrupt because we're being recorded. If anyone wants to privately ask a question, you can send it to me and I can read it out. So you can send it to me in direct message. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt. Rachel, I'm also very interested in C15 and understanding what C15 is and how it may or may not affect the rights of Indigenous people.
Okay. Okay, great. And if at any point there's a clarification or a break or anything else, just go ahead and wave, because I don't want it to be, I understand, you know, after a long day and especially after a meeting, which I'm sure was very thrilling, that you want to be able to just sort of hear more of a conversation, which I think is necessary when we're talking about Indigenous topics. And I appreciate, thank you for your candidness in giving me some really good feedback. So the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, yes, I think when it was finally actually passed as a declaration, was in 2000, I think it was in 2007. But this has been the culmination of years of work, probably 18 to 19 years of work of lobbying at the United Nations level. And part of the reasoning why people were at the United Nations level, or why they were lobbying for the United Nations rights on the Declaration of Indigenous Peoples, is because they really felt that we were not being, we were Indigenous people in across all the global countries were not being acknowledged as human beings. They didn't have basic human rights. So this is where the whole sort of journey towards defining what the rights of Indigenous people would look like, that's where it began. And so that was years of different Indigenous groups, and that's global Indigenous groups coming together and trying to form one declaration that would cover all the aspects, the spirituality, the education, the health, all the concerns of the Indigenous people from global countries. That's what the development of the United Nations Declaration was initially supposed to be. So it was developed with a lot of input, but at the same time, as with any organization, there were some strategic and political things happening, some lobbying at different tables. So Indigenous people also kept seats at the third level with the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So we also sit at different tables because we understand that and it is very colonial. It's colonial to an international level, that there are very specific boxed approaches that where we have to go fit ourselves into. So that includes the idea of human rights and the Declaration of Indigenous People as being a human rights instrument. So I'm on a Facebook and I'm on Twitter, and I had just mentioned to Twitter, or I tweeted out last week. I said one of the problems I've always had with UNDRIP is that although it is a very good statement for Indigenous peoples to have developed, it only applies insofar as human rights. And if you look at any Indigenous tribe across in any of the global countries that we're talking about, we're not only talking about human rights, we're in a lot of times we're talking about the culture, the spirituality, the ties to the land, the earth, the waters. So that part doesn't come into force in a declaration like the UNDRIP declaration. So that's kind of one problem I've always personally had when I look at this document. And at the same time, I understand the need to have a unified voice, as Indigenous people, to kind of come to the table with global powers, Western powers, and try to work out or have this idea of reconciliation, have it build or continue, or have it have some kind of effect, meaning, so that we have, peace and understanding in the world. But I don't necessarily think that can happen if we don't have the proper understanding of Indigenous people. So right now, what we have, or what most Canadians have, is they have a very colonized picture of what has been taught to them in Canadian history. They're taught, basically Canada starts at when Cabot landed, or, when General Vancouver was sailing around that part of the island. But we're missing out on the thousands of years of history of what was taking place prior to that. So I think that's an important part if we're talking about education, and if we're talking about reconciliation. We need to talk about those. We need to understand that there is generational gaps, huge swaths of oral tradition and history that we are not seeing, and that we are not getting in our Canadian public school system. So kind of it starts at that. That's why I like to discuss or talk at the education level, because I think it's important that we put it in the right context right away. So so this was an aspirational, or a document that was sort of to guide Western and global powers in talking about the treatment, because the treatment of Indigenous peoples, yes, in some places is terrible. If we talk about Ecuador, Peru, and we talk about some of the things, some of the ways the Aboriginal populations in Brazil have been treated, and just, burnt out, or how the rainforests are being literally cut out from underneath them. It's terrible, but similar things are happening in Canada. Similar things are happening in Canada when you have people, trying to protect old rainforests, people trying to protect pristine water supplies, and no more pipelines coming through, because they're worried about the water, the effects of the chemicals to the land. And yes, I know I don't want to start the debate that we have the proper science that tells us that these things are all 100% safe and everything is hunky-dory, because I think right now, if you look at the world circumstance right now in the middle of a pandemic, we can't even get our chickens in a row over this vaccination. Whether it's effective, whether it's there's a waiting period of 3 weeks to 14 to 16 weeks, the strengths of them, new variants coming out, are they going to fight them? So all this uncertainty is where I think my people live. We live in that uncertainty because we've lived in there for such a long time. Prior to that, prior to the colonization or the settlement of Canada, I think that we were more or less following paths that were already prescribed to our people. That is, following the seasons, following the natural growth, the natural way the waters ran. We didn't try to move rivers. We didn't try to move animals out of their natural habitats. We lived within their confines. There's a good story that I was telling, I've told a couple of times on Facebook, and I know your area has some nice wooded and a little bit of mountains over there too as well. But there's a story out here in my area, where on the west, directly on the west side of the Rockies, right by Banff, between Banff and Calgary, and there's an area where the grizzly bears go. They go there to teach their young. They go there to teach little bears how to push over. They start teaching them how to push over logs so they can start to be able to harvest for themselves ants and feed themselves. And then in the summertime, there's a place, and we say it's where the bears go to dance. So we know where this place is, kind of behind us in Kananaskis. But in the past few years, development has tried to go in there. They've put up ATCO trailers and tried to look at those camping areas, or that area where the grizzly bears go. And they're trying to start some kind of a development, more hiking trails and things back there. The first ATCO trailer they put back up there, the bears kind of like pushed it over. The second time they did that, they dragged that ATCO trailer down. And I was talking to my family, because my family, one of my brothers runs traditional land studies, and he was telling us, he said, it's like the bears are fighting because we're not fighting. The bears are actually having to physically make this fight. That's why I'm talking about the difficulty about the United Nations rights on the Declaration of Indigenous Peoples. It's also our responsibility to steward the land. It's also our responsibility to steward and to assist and fight for the animals, the plant life, the waters. So and we're already at this one stage where we're fighting, or we're not passing that part. So that's kind of it's both disappointing, overwhelming, because we can't even, it seems like we can't even get our humanness evaluated or validated by mainstream society. So that can be something that's disappointing for Indigenous people. But anyways, back to the UNDRIP. So the definition, hearing about it as a treaties, or a very pristine declaration that holds a lot of weight and power. Yes, it was a very well-written document. But when it was just before it was passed in 2007 in New York at the United Nations, whatever General Assembly that was then, they were going to pass this document, but the Western states came in and asked for, they wanted to have one more section put into the declaration. So they wanted an article in their Article 46, which talks about nothing in this declaration shall take away or derogate the territoriality, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, of the state. So in essence, what the Western states did is they put in a veto. They put in a veto right at the very end of the document, and they would not pass that, they would not pass the declaration unless that veto was in there. So that's, again, disappointing, but predictable. And once they had their veto in there, they passed it. And still, this goes to what you had asked, Adrian, Canada and, or sorry, not Adrian, Sky, Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand were like the holdouts. And I think why is because they are the last colonial vestiges of sort of the British Crown, and they are fighting with their Aboriginal populations. Canada basically got the cars to the driver's keys to the car of Great Britain. In New Zealand, they had developed a treaty in New Zealand that was both written in Maori and written in English. So there's a constant fight or struggle about the interpretation of that treaty in and what does it mean from the Maori perspective versus the non-Maori perspective. What does that treaty mean? In Australia, I think if anybody, there's a really good movie out called The Rabbit Proof Fence. There's a lot more, it's a lot harder to look at some of the things that have been done in Australia. And that's similar to what's happening in South America and Central America, the treatment of our Indigenous relations. So I think that, again, that stems from that colonial power and the patriarchy that comes with it, in that colonial power, saying that, you know, that we have to have a certain system, and that system has to basically worship the way it's supposed to worship. And I don't even think now that what had begun as the Christianization and breaking of our Indigenous people, I don't even think that that's so much the directive anymore as it is making our people into some kind of economic, I don't even know, I don't even have the words, the economic forces of labor, or we're market forces. We're not seen again as human beings or people, or as the original people, or as stewards, or as the landholders, or as the climate controllers. We're not seen as any of these things, which are our roles. We're seen as encumbrances. We're seen as throwbacks. We're seen as, you know, we're taking needlessly, or draining the economy. I think that's the word, draining the economy. That's the word I'm looking for, because we're not contributing to the economy. And yet the land that Canada sits on was never willfully ceded or surrendered. You can look at a treaty document and see ceded and surrendered, but those words did not have impact or meaning for our Indigenous ancestors, because we did not understand what it meant to cede or surrender the land. We understood that non-First Nations wanted to share the land, and we're fine with that, and we're still fine with that. It's nice to be able to share and bring other people in and to accommodate and to help. That's part of that's one of our first teaching, is when you have visitors come into your area, you welcome them and you bring them in. And so, you know, when I come into this territory, it's usually a person from the territory who does the welcome and just says, I'm welcoming you on behalf of the Coast Salish people, and welcome to our territory. And that's it. It's the acknowledgement comes from non-Salish people, or non-people who are not in that territory, making they're making the cogent effort to say, I'm not from this territory, but I'm actually acknowledging whose territory this is. So there's a few things that are happening, and I'm been a long-time educator. I went back to law school when I was 46. I raised my kids. So I was a single mom. And when my youngest son turned 18, I went back to law school. And then after that, I convocated just before I turned 50. But I had no willingness to go into the Canadian court system, because I think I just would uphold the Canadian court laws, their legal system. Instead, what I'm doing is I've done a lot of more policy work, or work at the spiritual law level. And that means I'm working with our own First Nation communities and trying to help them reinvigorate their laws, or the ways that we did things, because we really didn't even have things called laws. We just had a way of doing things. So that's where I spend my time. It's by no means is it work that makes any kind of money. And it's sort of, I'm forging a new path in an area that has not really been written or not really been worked in. So while I'm doing it, I'm also learning. And I think that that's correct, because as Indigenous people, we believe that learning is lifelong and that you never stop learning. So that if we do have things to teach, we also have things to learn. And I like that idea that I'm still learning. So the chair asked about some of the pitfalls of the UNDRIP. I think I've mentioned, I've put kind of like a slant on the whole way in which the UNDRIP was developed, and then the way that it was introduced, was brought to Canada 2000 and I don't know if it was 2007, but I know that Harper said he would look at it as an aspirational document. 2015, 16, when the Liberals are coming in, Carolyn Bennett said that they would adopt it, without question. Then Jody Wilson-Raybould came back and said, within the constructs or within the understanding of Canadian law. So then that takes away from the humanness, the human rights parts of the articles that talk about self-determination, talk about protecting the land and the water, those things that are really very beautiful and grounded articles within the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Those really beautiful things are getting pushed aside. They're getting, that is becoming a secondary conversation. Instead, the conversation is centering around economics. Instead, the conversation is centering around consent, around what's the definition of free, prior, and informed consent for industry and for development. And so again, we're going back to this idea or this argument on what is reconciliation. Is reconciliation coming into a country, agreeing to share the resources and land, and then actually setting up hierarchies where the elites or certain groups, corporations, whoever, the 1%, 10%, I don't know how big they are now, share the bulk of those resources, and where everybody else is fighting for recognition or a piece of that. Is that what we agreed to? And is that what we're reconciling? Because in my understanding and in the teachings and the stories and the traditions that have been handed down to me, my understanding is that we were to coexist. And I've heard it put by the Haudenosaunee or by our Eastern brothers as two canoes side by side in a river that don't intersect and don't disturb one another, but yet we go down that river side by side. And I like that analogy. I think that that's a very powerful analogy to say that we remain who we are. And who we are is people who care about the land, people who care about one another, people who keep our elders in the home, people who believe early childhood or childcare starts at the conception of a baby. That's when you start talking about education, because the mother and father start to be educated about how they're going, some of the responsibilities they're going to have, what are the responsibilities that they're going to place on this child. And when this child comes into the community or into the collective, into our group, that child has a role to the collective, to the community. He has a role to be a hunter, a warrior, a communications person. Even though we've moved into a modern sort of technical age, some of those roles we can move those roles forward through time. But the important thing is that you're part of a large clan or family system, and that's for survival. And I think certainly from the recent things that have happened in the last year or two, people are understanding, that you do need family, you do need friends, you do need, even if you create an urban family or people to help you, because survival is about working together, and survival is about caring for the land and the waters and each other. It's not about myself, that I need to survive. And I think that's, part of the problems that we're seeing in society now is the selfish individualism, the me-ism that's been around, that is part and parcel of Western ideology or Western thinking. There's this thinking that is, I am more important than everybody else. I am more important than everybody else. You don't matter. Old people can be put into elders' homes. Children can be, they have to be looked after, but they're the next market forces. And 20 years from now, we do got to keep them healthy, kind of. That way of thinking is never been our way of thinking. Children are a gift. Children are lent to us by the Creator. So we bring them up with love and kindness and understanding, but we also set limits for them. And you also challenge them, and you also teach them skills. A lot of, I find for our Indigenous students, and I've worked in post-secondary, and I've done work with school boards. I've written a school handbook for Northern School District here in Alberta. But I find that a lot of our children are visual learners. But the other thing is many of the skills they learn are many of the things they learn, or the way they learn, was skill-based learning. They learn by repetition of doing a task rather than reading and memorizing. And I think that that's a necessary thing to have in classrooms. It's necessary to encourage artists. It's necessary to encourage dreamers, to encourage people who make songs, to encourage. This is kind of like, I'm just thinking out loud from the way our education system worked. People who are healers, or who have the gift of empathy or compassion, or have humility, who are your leaders, who give for everyone before themselves. All those things that are the strengths of my people and my culture. I think that those things have never been taught and have never come out very clearly to the Canadian public. And once those ideas come out, or once those values or that worldview comes out, it's not a threatening worldview, and it's nothing to, it's certainly nothing I can market or make money off of, being humble or sharing. But I think it's something that it's a necessary way to change the energy, or to change the thinking in the world, to go from competition to compassion, to go from competing to helping. I think some of these things are, I think now that they're becoming current, like quantum physics, and the way our Indigenous people talk about traveling. If you read some of the stories, or some of the oral histories of our very traditional people, I'm not talking 120 years ago, or maybe 200 years, I'm talking, generations ago, and the way they talked about, being able to see over a large area, being able to see the bow, or the curve of the Bow River, which is why my people called it Winchispa. It means a bow. And then it very coincidentally, or at the same time, the Siksika people, completely different First Nation on the other side of Calgary, they have a name for it, and it also means the bow. So like, I think about these things, how we have names for things that we seem to have seen, or been able to visualize in a different level. So those things, that are kind of they're becoming cool on Netflix. They're becoming stories, or things that are being investigated in quantum physics and in other areas. Those are the stories, the teachings, and the things that my people have been saying and believing for thousands of years. But within all that is that spiritual component, that tie to the land. And it's not necessary, I don't think the land is God, and I don't think the trees are, churches or organs or anything like that, and playing music. But I do think that the space, or the place, is very special, is very, when you're having difficulties, and I think people found this during the pandemic, when you're penned up in your home or whatever, that, you had 2,000 square inches, or 2,500 square feet. And, did that extra 100 feet really matter? Or did it matter to be able to, open your windows, or to be able to get outside to see life and to see the clearness in the air and to feel the breeze and to hear the birds and the different types of animals and plant life moving and talking. I think that this is where the world needed to go, because we were getting off, it was like driving a really fast car and really not having your drivers or your learners or any kind of experience, just going. And I think that we've had to be able to slow down and to take a look and to come back to what it is we want to see going forward into the next millennium and for our children. And that's why the UNDRIP is or the Indigenous teachings or the talk or the worldview or what I'm trying to give you. I don't want to see that, you don't want to see that, you don't want to see that become just like washed away and become part of an economic game plan or suited up as something else to make people believe, that there isn't hard work to be done or there aren't real changes that need to happen. And that's what I think is going to happen. That's the fear I have with this bill, is because they're not defining what parts they're going to take. They're saying in this bill C-15 that they have a very nice preamble that talks it has all the touchy-feely words in the beginning, but the actual legislation part is looking at specifics, and it's not talking about that very flowery part, which is basically the spiritual or cultural component. You're lying to us. And we've had certainly Indigenous people have had their years, I was going to say months or hours, but actually it's years, thousands of years, not even thousands, hundreds of years of duplicity and having to fight for some of the basic rights that other people take for granted. Like today, I'm on the reserve. I have a rural Wi-Fi hub, but in the bad weather, only it may not work, and so everybody is, Disney One and the gamer upstairs, or everybody's quiet and laid down because only I can be on right now. And I know that doesn't happen in the city. And if I was being kind to my children or my grandson, I would have gone to the city, but it's snowing and I didn't want to drive. So those are the kinds of things that we deal with in First Nation communities, in addition to the water, in addition to the infrastructure. We can't always get out. If your road is, and I'm sure this is true for rural areas of BC too, if your road is impassable and you're far back in the reserve on high hills, and we don't have pavement roads to begin with, we have gravel grid roads. So if the plows or things can't get up there, you just can't get out. And that's difficult when you think of Jordan's principle, people with dialysis, people who need to seek medical attention. And again, given our culture of we're keeping our elders in our home, we're keeping our high needs children with the family, because the love and the nurturing that comes from family is something that's related to the health or to the curing of that child, or to the better mindfulness, the mental wellness for that child or for that elder. So there are a lot of different topics. I strayed way off on drip. It was dripping. It was dripping around me, and it was. I respect really the articles of UNDRIP, and I think that they are very they're beautiful utopia-like articles that we would one day maybe get to. But I don't think that you can take any of those articles right now and meaningfully put them into some kind of a legislation or a document, because on the one hand, there's absolutely no understanding. We completely understand this side, though. We understand what they want to do, which is why we're fighting. which is why we're saying no. You will not water down, you will not tamper or hurt the power, the beauty, and the love and the structure that's there, where we can't allow that to happen. So I think that's in a nutshell, that's what is happening with UNDRIP from the kind of the treaty perspective, and from the treaty lands perspective, and also from when you know your history, your language, that we have sacred places here in the mountains where we pray, where you know, when you have that connection and that belief system that has carried your people, your family through for generations, and you feel that power and that spirit still alive in you. And when you have your first grandchild and they have their first rite of passage, or they do something and they are proud in that moment that they're Indigenous, when you have that moment or that connectivity in this land, I think that's when people will start to understand what Indigenous people are talking about. But it's also very hard for Indigenous people to articulate it. It's also very hard for Indigenous people to put into English or put into words that are going to be accepted by an education crowd, a health crowd, industry crowd, government crowd. It depends. And so you need communicators, or you need these people who are fluent in different ways of making analogous arguments, or analogous, making those kinds of comparators or comparisons so that people can see. And there are not a lot of people doing this. Again, and I said, I think it's easier for some of the people who have really been pushing for the UNDRIP, who are Indigenous legal people, as well as Indigenous, lawyers or MPs. I think it's very easy because they have a paycheck. They have a paycheck. They are getting paid by Canada. And the people who are on the ground, who you don't see, the people without the running water, the people without the proper homes, the people who are living on gravel roads and in, substandard housing, mold housing, without a lot. Those are the people we're not hearing their voice. And so we have to, some of us at least, have to try and bring that voice to the forefront, bring that voice forward, so that we have a better idea of, and I always like to try to share the beauty, the power of who we are as Indigenous people. Because if we share that, and if you understand a little part of that, then hopefully it would change, or it would help you to be open in when you hear different thinking, or when you hear the worldview that we're bringing forward. Because like I said, it's not threatening, it's not terrible, it's nothing to take over the world. It's different, and it's the way, and it's the language of the land. It's the way you hear the rivers flow. It's always been here, that song, and I think it's a beautiful song, and we should hear it for what it is. I think I'm going to end there before people start crying.
Crying because it's good to hear. I have a few things in the comments that I think a couple came to me, but a couple are bigger. So I'll just start with, so one of the parents said that they're a Canadian permanent resident, but they were born in the States, the Southwest US, and they knew nothing about UNDRIP, and except what they read in preparation for this meeting. And I think that this is echoed later, particularly interested in the difference in approaches to these issues from the United States and Canada, or whether it's the same, but also what roles that those of us who are not Indigenous, what roles have we to play in the work of ensuring that UNDRIP is respected. UNDRIP itself, not a changed version of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really good question. I think Thank you for that. My mom actually is originally from Yuma, Arizona. That's why I'm not like the other Indians around here. My mom is from, my mom was an American Indian, Native American from Yuma, Arizona. She was Quechan. And she went to Cook Christian Training School. She was studying to be a Sunday school teacher. And my late dad, the Reverend Dr. Chief John Snow, was studying to be a minister, a United Church minister. So he went down, the only place he could do that was in Phoenix. He went down to Phoenix. He met my mother, who was from Yuma, Arizona. They married and they moved up here to Canada. I actually was born in Saskatchewan. I was born in Saskatchewan, and then my dad was moved from different ministries and eventually came, but his home reserve, or this is our reserve, our home reserve is Morley. So I think, yes, there are differences between the treatment of it in the US and and Canada. I think one of the things is if you read all the documents, I certainly didn't read all the documents that you posted. Thank you, Karen, for that homework. I didn't read all the documents, but I think the document by Charmaine Whiteface, who's I guess my relative, or because she's one of the Oseti Sagoi, we're one of the part of the 7 tribes of the Sioux Nation. She came out with quite a good book talking about, she went section by section on the articles, and she was really the person who sort of talked about Article 46, and that the Western states had put a veto into the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I think the treatment of Canadian Indians versus United States Native Americans has been different. And there's 2 reasons for this. In the United States did not come from sort of a mother country. They wrote a constitution based on the Iroquois, based on the Iroquois model that they followed, but they have their 2 houses in the United States, and they believe that the First Nations are domestic dependent nations. So they have afforded First Nations some autonomy or self-government controls to a point on their reservations. And this is reservations. So they have a different relationship with First Nations in the United States versus in Canada. And you see like the Deb Haaland, I think her name is Highland. Well, she was just promoted, or she was just made the Minister of the Interior in the United States. She is a Native American woman and fully invested and working in a system because she is part of that system. As all Native American tribes are sort of in a relationship with America in general, I think it's easier for them to work within the institutional framework because they're domestic dependent nations within that framework. Whereas in Canada, our treaties are with the British Crown. Our treaties are with Great Britain. So our relationship is before Canada. So then Canada comes after the treaties. Actually, the treaties establish Canada. So our relationship is different. And I think that's also why there's a struggle now because the Canadian relationship is not so easy. Well, I don't think it's easy in the States either, in the United States either, but I think it's there's more levels of difficulty. You see that on the eastern coast, the Mi'kmaq fishermen have been told that they will be accorded a moderate livelihood, and that'll be federally imposed. Whereas there's just a case 1 on the West Coast where the BC Court of Appeal is saying that the BC fishermen, Native Indigenous fishermen, will have a right to fish for moderate livelihood or to trade. So it's like bookends happening in the country. And then I, as you know, a graduate from law school, look at it and say, well, this is crazy, because on this one hand, you have precedents in law happening that's going to be looking like this. And on this side, you have this other law. So you have the total opposites happening. and not a, no, there certainly isn't certainty in that. I keep saying certainty because that's the word that keeps being used around UNDRIP, that people are looking for certainty. There is no certainty. There can't be certainty in things in life, but you can, I guess, mitigate your risks as best you can. But you can also, and that's where, the Indigenous thinking of trust and faith and our spiritual belief system comes into play. So then again, that, gets us into in a different area, into a metaphysical area. I think that answered the US-Canada question.
Yeah, definitely. Alec reminded us that we here where we live, we are not in treaty territory right here where most, if not all of us are right now. And as well, that the relationship is different than in the rest of Canada in terms of, and also that the treaties were later. They came later, so they weren't previous to Canada being a thing. I think,
yes, that's true.
if I have that right.
I think, well, I think, I'm certain that when Vancouver was sailing around there in 1792 or whenever he was cruising through BC, that there were Squamish, Coast Salish people in the harbor and doing their trade as they had for thousands of years. There was an opportunity for treaties then. The Douglas treaties certainly were signed in BC, and there's some of the northern tribes that managed to be included into Treaty 8. So there are some treaties, more or less historic treaties, that were signed in the BC area. But that's primarily true as well, that because I know one of the cases, one of the first cases we read is the Musqueam case, and about the Gulf course. When you're studying Indigenous law, that's a case that you read very quickly. And this is the Canadian version of what Indigenous law is because Canadian law centers around property and putting a Indian ban into a conflict situation that's resolved by Canadian law is what law schools are calling Indigenous law. When I talk about Indigenous law, I'm talking about the way that our young people are taught to what is the procedure, what is the process, what is the way that we bring a young woman into bring a young girl into her womanhood. That what is the process? What is the procedure around that? That's an Indigenous law. Or a young man earning his first hunt. That's an Indigenous law. Specific to the Stoney, specific to the Coast Salish, if they have different things, probably harvesting or fishing or making nets, they probably have different ways that they are looking at bringing their children along. But that's an Indigenous law. This thing like Musqueam and the case in the court in the Gulf, that's Canadian law. That's Canadian law with some Indigenous person or an Indigenous band as a plaintiff. That is not our law. That's just Canada calling it Indigenous law. But so then there's that, Alex, you're completely right. There's these layers of complexity then for the non-First Nation, for the First Nations who have no treaties, who are right next door to some First Nations who have the Douglas treaties, and then this wide area, and then there's treaties in the north part of BC, and almost to the edge, not really of southern BC, but certainly in the interior. Then you're looking at modern day treaties that were signed with the Crown, that were signed with Canada. So trying to get a voice for every one of these groups is, like taking, a group of kids into a gym and giving them all different toys or games to play with and bringing them all back and saying, everybody have one common set of rules. You can't, because there's the things that they were given are all different at different points in time. So there can't be just a one size fits all. But that's what Canada likes to do. Canada wants this, they want us all to be brown and we're all Indians and we all need one law. And this has been a continuous argument by First Nations, is that, thank you, Adrian, for acknowledging and recognizing that, is that we are different. We are different people. We are different, we are different language speakers. Oh, can you hear me?
No, sorry. I thought my mic was muted. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Anyways, so that is one of the things that, another thing that we're trying to communicate when we talk as Indigenous speakers. We're trying to also balance that idea that there are many voices, and so that there are many truths, and that there are many ways to walk together into a different world, or into hopefully a better setting for all people.
Sorry for interrupting you there.
That's fine.
My kid's trying to bake some bread that I made earlier, and I got confused. So I think that people are, I know that our school board has adopted UNDRIP. Our government has adopted UNDRIP, and I know that you're not necessarily a specialist in BC adopting UNDRIP, but do you have concerns that you would like to voice about UNDRIP being adopted, or do you have ways that parents at the school level, so at our PACs, which are like PTAs, right? They're the legislative bodies of parents representing families at the school. And DPAC is of course the district one, but are there ways that have meaning that we can show up in our communities, or can insist that when they adopt UNDRIP, for example, that it is done in a way that benefits people, not just another cosmetic performative thing? Does that make sense? Am I asking?
Yes, and I think, well, I think the idea that that some institutions, they look at it as an aspirational document and see that it's, you know, very powerfully written, and it does seem to be very pro-Indigenous, and that's good. Being able to adopt this or embrace this as a country or as people, I think that's a good sign. But I also think that as individual institutions agree or look at this, they also are looking at the voices, the actual Indigenous people who are supporting it, and who is or who isn't, and what does that conversation look like. So I think that's important, is always to bring out the other side of the conversation, because if you do that, then you're not just saying, yes, it's a beautiful thing and we're all kumbaya and get on with it. I think you need to say, yes, it's a beautiful thing, but what, you know, we've seen many beautiful things. What exactly, how exactly will this be applied, or what is the benefit for the Indigenous person, you know, or an Indigenous child who's hungry in his reserve right now? What is the benefit? So I think those are the kinds of questions that we have to ask, because when we're talking about the rights of Indigenous people, we're talking about the collective rights of all of us. We're not talking about Perry Bellegarde or Mary Ellen Turpel voicing what they think is the voice of us. We're talking about our voices at the community level, at the clan level, at the family level, being able to have that expression, or that right to speak. And I don't think, if Canada introduced this bill in December 2020, and it's been 4 months, I don't see how you can have a proper consultation of almost 1 million First Nation Indigenous people in Canada during a pandemic and say that you are getting their free, prior and informed consent. We're not even getting the consent of the Indigenous people to agree to allow Canada to put this forward in a bill that they might turn around and, you know, they might strip it to its bare minimum, or they might do nothing with it. So it's just, it's kind of like, again, that risk management, mitigating our risk management. We're not at a space or a time. If after this pandemic and after more education and more talks like this and more sharing and the actual consultation and the actual bridge building between First Nations and mainstream, I think after that, then we can start to talk about things, laws or things that have to happen at a federal level together, instead of saying that it's just there's a time right now and there's a rush and this has to be done because Canada wants a seat on the UN Security Council and they can't get it unless they pass the UNDRIP in Canada. I'm like, if that's what's happening, let's just say that then. I'd rather put the truth out there.
So one of the things that we're working on in Vancouver is removing the student liaison officer program, the school liaison officer program, which is police in schools. Can we use their adopting of UNDRIP to push that agenda?
Say that again, sorry.
So people are demanding that the police be removed from the schools as a program, and with our school board adopting UNDRIP, does this work fall under UNDRIP? Can it?
Well, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what the situation is with policing in schools. I don't think that's good. I don't think that's a way to go. But at the same time, I think that you know what we're talking about, what I've been talking about since I kind of began in the beginning. I've been talking about the approach where we're not only taking personal responsibility for myself, but I'm taking the responsibility for my child, my grandchild, and we're sitting and we're trying to work through it. Because if we look at it as a community, and that community approach, whether you're a school or, you know, whether you're a different kind of a group in an institution with teachers or social workers, if we start taking those kinds of approaches, I think that we'll start to find that collaboration and transparency or openness are far more, they are far more effective than trying to tamp down or hold or contain. That whole stop approach is not working. It's putting more harms into our communities, into our country, into our systems. I think we need to be more, and I've heard this too, like about community policing. Well, we can have community policing, but you could have like more like peacekeepers. You could have people in different roles and mediators, instead of in the roles of adversarial or, you know, win or lose. Because right now we're in a time, not win or lose, but everybody work together so that we can have a future. I think when times change, and this is throughout history, throughout the world or global history, that paradigm shift, you know, from the Renaissance to sort of the age of science and coming into the industrial age, you see the shifts. But I think this time the women are doing the shifts. So I'll just put that there.
So I don't want to hog the floor. I think I've gone through most of the comments that have come in the chat. There was just some noticing just that, I mean, Alex said the Canadian consultation policy is abysmal, so they can meet it as a minimum standard in the global pandemic, right?
Well, I don't even think, I think that this is the worst time to put, if this bill is going to change and shape the relationship be a new relationship and everything that Trudeau's always singing, if it really is going to be that, then why aren't you involving us? And why don't you have the dissenting voices there? Because I think the dissenting voices are as articulate, and we have the background and we have the same information in the notes. Again, it's just a matter of looking at these things and putting the truth out there. And I think if you're a person who's worked in this area and you believe, I believe in my people, and I believe in the truth, and I believe in what we have to offer, I think if that comes across to Canadians, that I believe that, you know, changes will be made. There are things that are happening now in the world that, you know, where there is so much uncertainty, and there's more mental, or there's more duress and more upset for people that hadn't been like that. And I think it's there are things that we can do as people, as First Nations, because we've always lived here on the land, and things that we do, whether it's, you know, meditation or spiritual, whether we bring in people who are healers, because we still have those people in our communities. They aren't nurses or doctors, but they are people who talk to your spirit, who talk to your soul, and who can, you know, do the work that they were put here to do. Those things are not they're not terrible or taboo or witchery. It's energy. It's about connecting to other people, to the land, to the space, and understanding who you are and how you're a part of that. And yes, living a good life, or what you would consider a good life, but also caring enough about yourself and your family to care about others and to think about the future. And I think we have a lot of kids coming. If Greta Thunberg is any indication, we have some kids coming up on environmental politics and environmental policy. They're afraid, they're not centered, and they're angry. And we have to start dealing with those kinds of thoughts and those kinds of thinking, in not words, but in our actions. And I think, you know, for the Indigenous people, we have a lot of actions, and we have a lot of prayers and rituals and things that we do to protect the land. Like I said, with the bears, we don't go to that area because in our language, in our way, it's where the bears go to dance. We leave them that area because it's their area, and we don't touch or take that from them, because they'll touch and take from us. Nobody wants to argue with a bear.
Sky, I think, had a question for you.
Oh, go ahead, Sky. I'm sorry, I kind of see people like very faintly on I minimized.
Oh, no, thank you so much, Rachel, for your words. And I know that so many people here are so deeply gracious and gratified by what you're doing, and all the words that you're sharing with us, all the stories, and all the teachings that you have you know, held. So so I guess I guess one of the things I'm wondering right now is, you know, a lot of people are starting to understand a little bit more, and are, you know, witnessing more of what's going on, and building relationships. And I think that, you know, there's some good things that are moving. But I'm just wondering, I guess sometimes people, you know, don't necessarily know how to be of, you know, supportive, or how to do the right, you know, in the different actions. So if it happens to be, you know, about a pipeline or whatever, you know, things that are happening, you know, how do people support the protection that is being provided by different Indigenous guardians of the planet? And what can people do if they feel moved to be more participatory in that and be supportive? What types of things can people do to be, you know, more in alignment with that, and witness and do the things that need to be done?
Okay, so I was just going to say it's the way that I believe, and what I'm putting out. Of course, there's always the the scamming fallbacks that will be out there that are saying they're environmental protectors or whatever, but not doing that. So that's always a cautionary. I would say that right away. But I think one of the ways that our allies can help is a lot of our people are very gifted craftspeople, tradespeople. And so one thing I don't have a problem with, one of the economic development ways of our people that we've always had is trading, whether it's for abalone, dentillion shells, or trading corn, trading the things that we did, you know, those kind of indigenous markets. I think at that level to encourage that, or to, you know, have an Indigenous art day where you have like maybe even visiting kids come in, or carvers, or whatever is happening that's in your area, just to encourage again that creativity, that shared experience, and, you know, possibly the craftspeople who are at the who are maintaining some of these basket weavings, and some of the things they do in your area are, you know, thousands of years old, very beautiful work with shells or things from the ocean, their jewelry. So I think those kinds of things, it's an acknowledgement, but it's kind of still in the economic area. So it's got that, but it's also kind of a teaching artistic thing. So I think that's a good, it's a good non-threatening slide, or it's a good non-threatening bridge to go into. And I think something like that, you know, aside from National Aboriginal Day, which is supposed to be a day of prayer, is to, you know, try once, you know, COVID is done, to try to attend events, to definitely follow Russ on Twitter or Facebook if you're on either one, because we do try to put up things that are basically that are grassroots related or driven, because those may not be all the pomp and ceremony things, but they are walks, and they are protests, and they are you know, voices or singing at a level that needs some encouragement and some help, especially with our young people. And I know that there are some very active, I don't know, more people in Vancouver with, I think it's Dakota Evans, but I think he's taking a break right now. But we're, of course, we keep track, and we try to encourage our young people across the country, assist them and help them and guide them, so that when we're gone, or we set up a path that they can follow, so that they're not lost, or they don't have any way or any knowledge of how to do something. So, and I think that's true for any of us, you know, wanting to leave a good footprint here on the earth, and wanting to leave a good path forward for people to follow. So I think one of the ways I think you can do that certainly is by, in this crafting non-threatening area. I think that's one of the ways that I would encourage that, because that's usually, people are usually fascinated by the mass, the totem poles, the different types of things that are available and it's less threatening for people to, or a poetry reading or a book reading, something like that.
Thanks. And I think that also Adrian is adding some names in the chat of different groups that are effectively working more locally, and to make sure that we're deferring to the local nations in terms of how we can help them as well in the lawsuits that they get stuck in the different ways that we can contribute financially to things that are quite obvious. And lawsuits are one of them. Like Cessnam was being dug up. That was the Midden back during just before Idle No More. And I know that I could bring food down there because they were all camped under the bridge watching to make sure that it wasn't dug up. So there are opportunities locally as well as further out to support.
And that's always a good thing is hospitality and food and water, like for people who are camping or who are doing a parade or a walk or something like that, just to be there. in case, you know, sometimes they just need a witness or somebody with a working cell phone with data to take down to record. There's different things, different times, different groups need. But it's thank you for asking, and thank you for being willing to put yourself out there and to join or to assist us. I'm grateful for that.
I think Gord had a question. Pulling Gord back in.
Sure. Thank you very much for that, Rachel. And I just want to repeat back some of what I heard from you, because I did ask the question about, like, you know, some of the pitfalls of UNDRIP. And I just want to repeat back some of what I heard, because I just want to make sure that I've got the right understanding of it. And so, you know, we've said that UNDRIP is full of, you know, good language, but some of how it's framed, we should be careful about some of the parts. And so what I wrote down is here, we should watch for implementations that try to separate the rights of Indigenous people and try to separate them from their cultures, their language, and their connection to their land. I mean, if you just treat it as only a rights issue, and you don't think about the culture, you're trying to simplify people down to units of productivity, which is not like a nation to nation understanding. It's like you're a thing and you're a citizen, be a good citizen, but you're all the same, which is not what we want. We're trying to work with and to reconcile. We need to understand that the rights are linked to the culture, and they're not necessarily linked to like some economic outcome that you wish for. That is to say, clean water, good internet infrastructure is important. Of course, you know, that's something that we think that everybody should have, but the goal there is to do that because we're all equal citizens deserving of that, not because, hey, I want to raise the GDP a few points. Have I got that right? Like, I mean, I think that
very good. That's a really good summary. I think I wrote it all down word for word.
Okay. No, thank you. I just, it's really useful. The reminder about the linkage to culture is really useful to me. Thank you.
Ishi, just talk.
All right. Hi, I'm Ishi, born and raised here in Vancouver. I really appreciate what you're talking about, and I've reflected on a lot of it. And one thing that I keep kind of turning over is the sort of Indigenous versus colonist view of generational wealth and sort of different cultural practices that you know, that we learn from where we come from. And I think about, even within the family, the sort of separation of the elders, going off to an old folks home in my family, and what does that tell me about how to relate to my parents, and the disconnect between my parents and, say, my children. And I you know, this is on a personal level, that sort of displacement. And I think about the generations before me of, you know, like the Holocaust, and how that broke my family and my Welsh side of my family, and how the English broke my Welsh side. And I think about all this sort of learning from that, and hearing what you're saying, and knowing that, yeah, it is what we're going to do for the future, and being, you know, good stewards for the environment and taking care of things. And I'm just wondering, like, the main narrative that we do get is that individual capitalist, you know, look out for yourself, don't even really necessarily care about your family, or your neighbor, or, you know, the people who are here first, any of that kind of stuff. And I just wonder how, because even in my own circle of friends, I'm probably one of the only people that is really kind of turned on enough to this sort of reality that wasn't taught in school, that's, you know, motivated me to get involved and do things and participate. And I'm just wondering, I see it happening for my kids, sort of the learning and the sort of engagement and the truth telling that's happening. But it feels like we need to teach all the adults, you know, like we need to teach everyone. And I'm not sure how to do that. But I feel like that is sort of an imperative. I feel like we need to somehow be able to teach other Canadian settler adults this sort of like really, I mean, I understand it's really basic, like I just get it, like things have been done wrong and we need to fix it and we need to make things right. I'm just wondering how to go about that. It just seems like such a challenge. Yeah, I mean, I try my best one-to-one with different people that I meet who maybe don't have very good understandings about Canada or about things, but I feel like it's a really big task that we all definitely need to teach our children, but also need to teach other adults. That's my rambling.
Oh, it's a good ramble. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your personal background in history, because I can see I can relate, or I can almost feel that kinship with you over in that issue or in that area. And I think some days, like, I'm overwhelmed because I'm like the only Indian on Facebook or anywhere, so I'm quite overwhelmed some days. But then other days, I look and something will happen. One of my grandkids will say blah 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 blah, and so I told them, I'm Nakota, and I'll look at that little voice and that pride, and I'll think that's happening. So I learned to go with those small victories when you're a child, or when somebody in your family or one of your friends asks you a question. It's that energy change, and we just need to help be those change agents. We need to, and that's why, I do have some stern or harder things to say. And if I run into the crowd that's going to want to have a battle and a fight and go down into legal jargon and actually throw down, okay. But if I meet a crowd where I feel like I can, where there's some expression, then I'm going to talk about the things that I think that need to go, because I know it's a concern for me too. It's a concern for me in my everyday with my own children, now with my grandchildren, and some of the racist things that they've had to deal with, and the fear that I sometimes have for my sons, because they're young Indigenous men and they have been accosted or whatever by police for not a particularly good reason. But my older son is very smart. He always says, my mom's a lawyer, do what you're going to do. So that usually gets him out. But it's an ongoing everyday exercise. I do take breaks. I do watch Big Bang Theory all day and just eat pop and chips. That helps. And then other days I have to get back to it, and I have to do my best to educate. And that's why I use social media. I use Twitter, I use Facebook. I was looking at TikTok, but I haven't got my eyebrows done yet. So, and I am going to be just a little bit vain about that. And because I can't afford to. So I was going to, I'm trying to put that message out. I'm trying to put the message out that we need to communicate with each other. We need to sit with each other. We need to have, part of the problem with the Truth and Reconciliation is that when I was talking to the United Church, because my brothers work with the United Church, and some of them went to the Vancouver School of Theology. They talked about, they didn't want to be witnesses because they didn't want to hear the hard truths or the hard talks that were happening. And I thought, you don't want to hear them, but you're only hearing them. We live them. So it's very nice to be able to say that I don't want to have to go through that, because it's gonna wreck my buzz. It's gonna blow my vibe. Like you're not helping me, relax and chill. So I understand that, but there's not gonna be much of a world to relax and chill in if we don't start doing the things that we need to do. So that's kind of like if our young people are saying it and if our young people are understanding it, it's a shame about the adults, but the people who are or who can should just keep at it and keep expanding, because when you start to open up that energy and start to talk about these things, your friends kind of change, your directions kind of change, you start to meet other people and impact, and it just goes. And that's always what I'm trying to do. Talk to this group, talk to another group in Manitoba, talk to a group in Northern Saskatchewan. Every time I do this, I'm hoping to help some people go forward and be encouraged, but also be challenged to step up and to go to walk into this and to know that, the thing that you're doing, trying to say, we should work together, we should listen to what the land has to say, is just the original teachings of my ancestors. It's just the things that have always been here. It's not a new thing or a terribly harsh directive. It's just listen and work and live with it, like hear it and respect it. That's, in a nutshell, pretty well it. And if you, take a walk right now in your area, if you're allowed to, I don't know what the lockdown is like over there. There's so much beauty and there's so much power in the natural landscape and in the land. Like, how can you, and maybe it took the world slowing down in the pandemic for everybody to stop and kind of look and see that. So there's a reason, and there had to be a reason why, so that we can acknowledge and come back to this relationship with the land and understanding we're part of it, and stop and slow down. There's bigger picture reasons for things happening. So if we start to think like that, start in the small steps, like I said, maybe have your kids do projects like that where they, make something that's fun, or do something that's culturally appropriate with Indigenous people, or have some people come in. And usually art is a good way to do this. If you start to do those kinds of things and build those bridges, I don't see why things won't be different for our kids in my grandkids now in 20, 25 years. And if I helped put up the markers for that path a little bit better, that's what I needed to do. And I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to do it.
So Rachel, there's Alec, and I'm gonna probably destroy your last name, Alec Guerin. If I have it correctly, please correct me. Is a young Musqueam member who
It's from the Guerin case.
happens to
So
be
one and the same.
And a fiduciary responsibility.
and he would just like to appreciate you and say
Thank you.
Go
Thank
ahead,
goodness
Al.
there's somebody there from Musqueam.
Alec Aaron Quinnisqueech to Litanat Musqueam. Nisli Quans Ziatama Quathami Hui Tanutwale. Ait Tanush Quellowen Quans Hui Nem Quathquel. Rachel, my name is Alec Aaron and I'm from Musqueam. And I just want to say I'm grateful to you for coming here today and speaking to us. And it lifted up my heart to hear your words. That's all I had to say. Haichka.
Oh, thank you so much. My name is Rachel Snow, but I'm also my Indian name, or the name I was given, is Thunder Woman. And I think I speak pretty loud. And I think that was given to me because that was the gift that I was going to have, is that I was going to be able to speak. I was going to be able to write, and that I had to share the message that I'm going to share. And I'm grateful that our people are here still on Turtle Island. I'm grateful that we still have lives, and that we still, when we hear each other's voices, we're uplifted and we go forward. So thank you for welcoming me. I'm glad these words were good for you to hear, and hopefully, things start to get better for all our people wherever they are, and for all people in this world.
Thank you so much, both to Alec and to Rachel, especially to Rachel. Thank you for agreeing to be here tonight, and bringing the information that you needed to share to us. I know that I speak for everybody who is still in this room, and for some people who had to drop off, but have already said that they'll be watching the video to catch the rest of it. Some are parents of young children and have to go put them to bed. But thank you so much for everything you've shared with us tonight.
Oh, I really enjoyed it. I think the questions I got, and thank you for the recap. Greg, George? Gord. Gee, I knew. Thank you for the recap, because I think that was, you know, if people can, you know, sort of give me the questions or the areas, and I can come back and deliver. That also makes a good communicator too, is kind of having the direction. So it all works if we work together. If I came in here and just, you know, spewed off numbers, names, dates, and sort of yelled at you and left, I don't think we'd be any closer to any kind of reconciliation. But I think if you are honest and you and that you can laugh and you can share, I think that works. That goes a lot farther towards working together as peoples. It's just the way it should be.
Thank you.
Okay, I can sign off now and save my Wi-Fi.
You can go to bed.
Thank you. What's is it 10 o'clock here? Yeah, it's 10 o'clock there. What time is it there?
9.
Here, 10 o'clock.
Oh, it's 9 o'clock there. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. We'll
Thank
see you
you.
again. Everybody stay safe.
Thank
Whatever
you.
this-